5 weeks and 2 days after the vows, she said it without looking at me. It's my body. You don't get to demand anything from me. The TV cast a blue aquarium light over the brown leather couch I'd bought years ago when I thought I'd be alone forever. Beside me, Ava scrolled her phone like the screen was a window and I was a wall. I tried to swallow the sentence, tuck it into some gentle place in my chest, but it scraped going down. My name is Ethan Langford. I teach 3rd grade at Westfield Elementary in Kansas City, Missouri. I can coax focus out of 8-year-olds with a whisper and a timer. I can turn long division into a game, but I couldn't find a way to turn my wife toward me. Not a real kiss since the reception, no hand on mine during late-night reruns, the guest room door carefully closed, like a posted border. I'm not demanding, I said. I'm asking why you won't even kiss me goodnight. You thought wrong, she answered, still scrolling. As if our marriage were a pop quiz I had failed. Silence is heavier in winter. The furnace thumped. Somewhere outside, a train shouldered past the city's edge. I went to the kitchen and made a sandwich turkey and Swiss on wheat, the steady lunch I've eaten since September. Routine is what teachers use when we're not sure what else to do. I stood there chewing, watching the empty mayonnaise jar on the counter, and remembered March. Reverend Thomas in his office, the soft tick of a clock. Ava saying marriage was about security and partnership. I'd heard depth in that word, security, as if it meant sheltering each other. Now it sounded like a locked door she held the key to. We dated for 14 months. We lived together for 6. We were intimate. We talked about everything except the thing that mattered most, apparently. After I do, the air changed as if the chapel had sealed a different contract than I believed, one where touch became a breach. I wanted to honor her autonomy. I still do. But honor isn't the same as erasing your own needs and calling it respect. Back on the couch, I tried to picture the woman I proposed to. Quiet, attentive, a careful smile that felt earned. She used to curl into my side during movies, tracing little half circles on my sleeve, listening to my terrible fraction jokes like they were gold. That version of Ava has been missing since the cake was cut. In her place, a polite roommate who says, "My choice," the way people say. End of discussion. I'm a patient man by trade. We practice patience in schools because kids grow on their own clocks. But there's a difference between growth and concealment, between boundaries and a barricade. Sitting there, the couch creaking under the shift of my doubt, I wondered which one we'd built, and whether I had ignored the signs because hope wears good manners. I didn't demand. I didn't raise my voice. I put the sandwich plate in the sink, rinsed it clean, and felt the chill of the guest room door from across the hall. That's when the first crack finally sounded like what it was, the truth knocking, asking to be let in. I met Ava at a fall conference 2 Octobers back. A lanyard maze of name badges and lukewarm coffee. She was at the district's family services table, listening to a grandmother describe paperwork as if it were a second language. Ava's attention didn't wander. She made people feel like a room had grown quieter, just for them. When she finally looked up, I joked about 3rd graders being expert negotiators. She said, "Then we're colleagues," and smiled small, careful, earned. We had coffee downtown that weekend. 3 hours went by without touching work again. She told me about a small Illinois town where the grain elevator cast the afternoon into rectangles and her parents split when she was 12. I told her about my dad dying during my sophomore year of college, how grief hollowed the house, how teaching filled the room back in with noise and names. When we parted on the sidewalk, the streetcar chimed and the air smelled like rain on brick. Kansas City felt like it was rooting for us. For a year, it did. She came to fall festivals and First Fridays, said yes to Boulevard Brewery tours, held her own in the chaos of PTA potlucks. My mom adored her no small feat, saying Ava had steady eyes. At school events, Ava fit. She didn't perform. She blended. We took pictures at the Nelson Atkins with the shuttlecocks in the background like giant punctuation. I thought the sentence we were writing together ended with always. Looking back, I can chart the soft red lights I rolled through. She preferred we split the bill exactly, even when I offered to cover. When we moved in, separate accounts weren't a conversation, they were a condition. She said it was about fairness. It sounded sensible, adult. I told myself equality could wear numbers, like a suit. When I floated the idea of a future, maybe a house nearer the park, maybe children someday, she'd say, "We'll see. in a tone you use with weather, not refusal, not promise. I mistook caution for depth. During engagement, she could talk for hours about the wedding's palette sage and cream, and which florist could make arrangements that photograph clean. But if I mentioned a honeymoon or how we wanted to live once the glitter was swept up, she'd change the subject, tuck the question into a pocket as if it were a receipt. I told myself she was private, that privacy could bloom into trust if I watered it with patience. Some cultures run on volume. Ours here often runs on politeness. In the Midwest, we teach children to take turns, to wait, to share. I believed in that. I thought love was a long classroom, that if I kept showing up, understanding would ring like a dismissal bell, and we'd walk out hand in hand into a simpler afternoon. There's a way hope edits memory in real time. It rounds off the corners, files the edge from a refusal, makes not yet sound like almost. When Ava traced my sleeve at the Nelson lawn, I didn't hear the other sentence forming the one made of equal halves and locked ledgers, the one that kept love at arm's length and called it respect. I know now that stability can be a beautiful word. It can also be a currency, and sometimes while you're counting, the cost hides in the math. The guest room door started as courtesy and became a border. At first, Ava said she slept better alone, that the newness made her restless. I nodded, because newness can be loud. We told ourselves it was temporary, like winter construction on a familiar road. But weeks stretched, and the door learned to close without sound, a practiced hush that still landed like a verdict. She had a sentence she used when I tried to talk. My body, my choice. Not as a bridge, but as a period. I agree with the truth inside those words. I teach children to respect themselves and others, to ask before they take, to listen when someone says no. But a marriage cannot live on a single sentence used to end every conversation. Consent is a rhythm, not a locked metronome. It has questions and answers, pauses and warmth. We didn't have rhythm. We had silence. I kept trying for smaller requests. Could we read in the same room before bed, even if we slept apart? Could I hold her hand on Sunday afternoon walks? Could we at least name what this was? She would say, "Not tonight," or "Don't push," and open a book, as if she were flipping to a page where I did not appear. Respect and erasure look similar in soft light. I was afraid of becoming the kind of man I didn't recognize, the one who demands, the one who mistakes access for love. So I withdrew, rearranged my longing into tidier shapes, grading papers after dinner, washing mugs until they squeaked, running the dishwasher on empty cycles because the sound filled the spaces conversation used to live. At school, I was fluent in feelings, charts, and conflict steps. Statements, reflective listening, repair. At home, my sentences stumbled. The hallway seemed narrower. I could hear the guest room's gentle static, her white noise machine swaying the night into a blank field I couldn't cross. I told myself patience is its own kind of love. I told myself not to turn need into pressure. But needs don't disappear when you lower your voice. They just learn to whisper in the next room. Somewhere in that slow January, the memory of Reverend Thomas returned. The office's lamplight, the way he'd set a small recorder on the side table after asking if we consented, his careful explanation, for notes, for clarity, kept for 6 months. I felt a flicker of relief and then a rush of shame. What sort of husband thinks of evidence? What sort of love needs audio to be believed? I didn't call. Not yet. Instead, I opened a blank email late one night, typed Reverend, and watched the cursor blink like a small, patient heartbeat. I deleted the draft. I walked to the guest room door and stood there long enough to hear my own breath. Boundaries, I whispered to myself, are healthy. Barricades are not. I could no longer tell which one we were honoring. When I finally turned away, the hallway light clipped off, and the house settled. In the dark, a truth kept knocking, quiet but steady, asking me to stop mistaking silence for peace. I made the call on a Tuesday, during lunch duty, the cafeteria a bright echo chamber of milk cartons, pizza rectangles, and the soft thunder of children negotiating trades. I stepped into the hallway by the trophy case, pressed the phone to my ear, and watched my reflection blur in the glass. "Reverend Thomas," I said when he answered, my voice lower than I meant. "It's Ethan Langford. I need to ask about the recordings." He was quiet a beat, the kind of pause pastors learn to hold without making you feel examined. "Ethan, Good to hear your voice. Are you and Ava settling in? I stared at a poster reminding kids to be kind. The cartoon bee smiling like kindness were simple. That's why I'm calling, I said. You mentioned you keep the sessions for 6 months. Do they still exist? They do, he said. And you both consented. May I ask? Is everything all right? There are questions that open doors and questions that open chasms. I don't know how to answer that. I told him just enough. The guest room, the months of distance, the way my choice, had become a curtain pulled between us, and the sentences I remembered from his office security, partnership signals. I didn't want to turn my wife into a case file. I didn't want to turn myself into a plaintiff. But truth asks for light, even when you wish it would whisper and go to sleep. The recordings are available to you, he said slowly, if you need them. Not for revenge, for clarity. I'd ask you to listen with care. Revenge isn't what I want, I said, surprising myself with how tired I sounded. I just need to know I didn't imagine the ground moving under my feet. Thanks for watching. When I hung up, the bell rang, and the hallway filled with the slipstream of third graders carrying trays like careful acrobats. Malik, small for his age and tender in the ways that make you want to guard the world for him, tugged my sleeve. Mr. Langford, he whispered, if someone says one thing in class and the opposite outside, which one's the truth? I crouched to his level. Sometimes both are pieces, I said. But if the pieces don't fit, we have to check the picture on the box. He nodded solemnly, satisfied by the puzzle logic, and ran to catch his table. After lunch, I stood at the sink rinsing sticky grape juice from plastic cups and felt the echo of my own answer. Check the picture on the box. Back in my classroom, the clock hands stepped across the afternoon. I watched the door, half expecting courage to walk in like a late student, hair mussed, apology ready. Instead, I opened my laptop, drafted an email to Reverend Thomas, confirming I'd come by for copies, and hit send before I could name my hesitation. Fear threaded through the fear of appearing like the stereotype people warn about, the controlling husband who confuses access with love. But another fear stood taller, that I would keep participating in a version of marriage that had been edited without my consent. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the heater and the rustle of construction paper from the art bin. On my desk, a permission slip waited for a signature. I signed my name and realized that, in a way, I was finally giving myself permission, too, to ask for the whole truth, even if it changed the story I wanted. That evening, the house smelled like thyme and onions, a small pot steady on the stove. Ava stood over it with the posture of someone reading heat, not a recipe. I set my keys in the bowl by the door and felt the old ache of wanting to arrive someplace where I was expected. Ava, I said, we need to talk. She didn't turn. About what? The sessions with Reverend Thomas. The recordings. Her spoon paused mid-circle. A single bubble rose and broke. She faced me then, and I saw the quick extinguish of color in her cheeks. What about them? They exist, I said. And you said things there that don't match what we're living. Silence stretched thin between us. The clock ticked like a metronome we couldn't follow. Finally, she set the spoon down and folded her arms, a neat barricade. You wouldn't use those against me. Against you? I echoed. I'm asking if you ever intended a marriage that included the parts we never name because they're supposed to be understood. Touch, warmth, choosing each other in the same room. She didn't blink. I promised partnership, stability, a home where bills are paid and no one makes demands. She gestured vaguely, as if pointing at an invisible diagram. That's real to me. Is love in that diagram? I asked. Is intimacy anywhere on the page? Not everyone is built like you, Ethan. Her voice thinned. I'm not demonstrative. I said I value security. You heard what you wanted. The words landed like labels, tidy and hard to peel away. I thought of our vows, the way I had said with my whole heart as if the phrase could anchor us to a shore. I thought of her separate account, the guest room door, the way we'll see had been a hallway without an end. I'm not asking you to be someone else, I said softly. I'm asking if you told me who you were before we stepped into a contract that asks for both presence and promise. She lifted her chin. I gave you what I said I would give. If you expected more, that's on you. There are sentences that close a chapter when you don't realize you've reached the white space. I nodded, as if I'd been taught the lesson and only needed to show I'd taken notes. "Okay," I said. "I understand." I carried that understanding down the hall like a cool glass I didn't want to spill. In our bedroom, I opened my laptop. The screen lit my hands. I searched slowly, reading every word twice. Missouri annulment, grounds, fraud, misrepresentation, concealment of essential facts that would have changed consent. The language was dry, almost medicinal, but beneath it I felt the outline of what had happened, how a promise can be signed with one meaning and delivered with another. I wasn't hunting for punishment. I was tracing the edges of a truth I had avoided naming. If marriage is a house, you don't fault the wind for finding the cracks. You repair them, or you move before the winter takes you both. When I closed the computer, the soup was cooling. The house held its breath. Somewhere in that hush, a resolve settled quiet, steady, like a door finally opening the right way on its hinges. Ava moved first. It took 2 days. Monday morning, there was a new sharpness in the air, as if the house had been ironed. She met me in the kitchen beside a neat stack of toast and said, almost brightly, "I spoke to an attorney." The word stood between us like a snowplow. "He says what you're doing is retaliation. That courts see through men who can't handle no and dress it up as legalese." I felt my heart step back a pace, make room. "What's his name?" I asked, not because I needed it, but because details help me breathe. "Doesn't matter," she said, and sipped coffee like it was strategy. "He'll testify that you're trying to coerce intimacy by threatening annulment. Bodily autonomy isn't up for negotiation, Ethan. Their first one to dever indo, one dever. The basin dever indo." The phrase was polished now, weapon bright. I nodded, not in agreement, but acknowledgement. Okay. After work, I drove to a small brick building where the brass letters on a frosted door spelled Benton and Hale Family Law. Claire Benton had handled my father's estate years ago. In the waiting room, potted snake plants stood like trim sentries. Claire's office was warm in the careful ways, a rug with a soft geometry, a framed print of prairie grass that looked like it remembered wind. "Ethan," she said, shaking my hand with both of hers, "what brings you here isn't simple, so I won't pretend it is. Tell me everything." I did. Not the clutter, not the gossip, just the bones. The guest room, the words in Reverend Thomas's office, the recordings we consented to, the way love had been replaced by a ledger. She listened without blinking, the way good teachers do when a child circles the hardest part. When I finished, she folded a legal pad closed. "Annulments are difficult," she said. "Courts prefer to dissolve what's broken rather than declare it never was. But fraud, intentional concealment of essential terms, changes the math. If we can show she entered the contract with a meaning you could not reasonably have known, and that you would not have agreed had you known, your footing improves." Thank you for watching. But another wants to know from Mastings. "Thanks for watching." She's already framing this as coercion, I said. "That I'm punishing her for saying no." Claire nodded. "That narrative is common, and the principle behind it is good. The law should protect autonomy. Our task is to separate autonomy from deception. Consent to marriage doesn't entitle anyone to bodies. It does entitle both parties to honest terms. Your recordings, if authenticated and within retention, are not a cudgel. They're context." She laid out a plan with the clean edges of a lesson plan. Obtain certified copies of the recordings from Reverend Thomas. Prepare a timeline, dates, statements, behaviors without adjectives. File a motion to admit evidence. Anticipate their argument and answer it with the simplest language possible. "We'll request fees and the return of gifts," she added, not as theater, but because fraud shouldn't profit. On her desk, manila folders were labeled in a tidy hand. I thought how pain turns into exhibits, how a love story can be flattened to 12-point font and still somehow hold the shape of its ache. Claire must have seen my face. "The paperwork isn't the point," she said gently. "It's the bridge we walk to reach a place where the truth is visible." I left with a list: call the Reverend, draft the timeline, don't answer Ava's provocations in text. Outside, twilight thinned the day. In my pocket, the firm's card felt like a small square of permission. Not to punish, to proceed. At a red light, I pictured the courtroom I'd only seen on television. Seals and flags, wood polished by other people's endings. I wasn't after spectacle. I wanted the record to match the life. I wanted the story to stop arguing with itself. When the light turned green, I drove home to a house that looked the same from the street and knew it wasn't. I took the manila envelope to my classroom after dismissal, when the building's noise ebbed into the kind of quiet that remembers laughter. The custodian's radio hummed faintly down the hall, a tinny country song about getting home. I shut the door, pulled the blinds halfway, and sat at my desk with a yellow pad ready, as if I could grade what I was about to hear. Click. June's session began with the soft scrape of chairs and Reverend Thomas asking about past relationships. Ava's voice was even, almost clinical. She said attention drained her, that men kept asking for more closeness, more words, more presence, and she preferred arrangements where she could remain independent, keep her focus on career goals. Then the question he asked, what she sought in a husband. Someone stable who won't make emotional demands, she said. Security without expecting me to be something I'm not. I paused the recorder, wrote the words verbatim, underlined security until the paper shone. Click. July. Expectations, intimacy. Family planning. I heard my own voice first, eager and plain, talking about wanting kids someday, about building a life that looked like late dinners and road trips and 2 toothbrushes in 1 cup, because that sort of small mess makes a home. Ava followed with phrases like practical arrangement and mutual respect for boundaries. When the Reverend asked what those boundaries meant, she said, I'm not physically affectionate. I can manage a household and be a good partner, but I don't want to be pushed into romantic expectations that don't come naturally. She added, almost gently, Ethan understands I'm more reserved. I think he'll adapt. I stopped the audio again because something in me had. Adapt, the word we use in classrooms when the task is too hard as written. I wrote it down and watched the letters look back at me like a verdict I'd signed without reading. Click. August. The session, you can hear summer closing air vent, droning, paper moving, a pen tapped twice. Concerns before the wedding, the Reverend said. I said I had none. Ava said she felt relieved to be gaining stability, confident I would respect her need for space. Then, the hinge I had missed when it was said in the room. I intend to maintain separate sleeping arrangements after marriage. Physical intimacy isn't a priority for me, had she told me. Not directly, she replied. I've given him signals. If he hasn't picked up on them, we'll address it after the wedding. I let the machine run without me for a minute, her voice in mine, and the Reverend settling into the furniture. It wasn't that she disliked me. It wasn't that she feared me. It was that the marriage she entered and the marriage I vowed were different buildings with matching exteriors. She had planned the distance, wrapped it in manners, trusted my kindness to translate silence into consent, scarcity into patience. On my desk, the classroom fish tank burbled. A paper chain the kids had made for winter hung lopsided near the whiteboard, ring linked to ring, fragile but honest about its construction. I rewound the last minute and listened again to the part about signals. I thought of every "we'll see," every hand withdrawn midair, every polite change of subject. You can't build a life on hints. You can't be blamed for missing a door that looks like a wall. When I finally clicked the recorder off, the room felt both larger and colder. I wrote one last line on the pad. Kindness is not consent. Then I folded the paper, slid it into the envelope with the copies, and sat very still, learning how to breathe in a truth that didn't hate anyone and still could not be undone. On Friday, the house smelled like a magazine version of comfort pot roast, low and slow, rosemary bruised between fingers, bread cooling on a rack with a towel draped like a blessing. Ava had set the table with our wedding china, plates that had felt ceremonial the one time we used them. Candles burned at half height, the kind of light that flatters almost anything. I stood in the doorway the way you stand at a museum painting, noticing brush strokes, wondering what's been painted over. I took the afternoon off, she said, voice light, apron neat as punctuation. Thought we could have a do-over, start fresh. A loaf knife flashed soft against the crust. She placed a slice on my plate, steam rising, warm as an apology can look. We bowed our heads out of habit. I thanked the food and the hands that made it, and for once the prayer didn't know where to land. I tasted first tender beef collapsing at the nudge of a fork, carrots that remembered sweetness, bread with a shy crackle. It's wonderful, I said, because it was. Her shoulders loosened. I'm glad. She lifted her eyes, tried on a smile I recognized from the early months. We could go back to Reverend Thomas, if you want. Counseling. I've been thinking we can work on intimacy. I was scared, Ethan. Marriage is a big step. The word scared set its small weight on the tablecloth. I wanted to believe it. Fear is honest, even when it misleads. I reached into my pocket and set my phone beside the salt. There's something I need you to hear, I said quietly, and tapped play. Her voice filled the room, made strange by a tiny speaker. I didn't choose the harshest line. I chose the exactness. I can be a good wife in terms of partnership and household management, but I don't want to be pushed into romantic expectations that don't come naturally to me. We both listened to her past self say the future out loud. The clip ended. The house seemed to step back from us. Color left her face like a tide pulling hard. You can't use those, she said, not angry yet more like someone who finds a door where they thought a wall would be. They were private. They were true, I said. Private and true aren't opposites, but we didn't have both in the same room, and that's the room marriage needs. A beat, then the pivot I'd come to recognize, swift and smooth. She reached across, touched my wrist, her fingers cooler than the candle's glow. We can fix it, she said. I'll do whatever you want, however you want. Just, let's not destroy this. I thought about how food is the oldest apology we have, how it asks the body to forgive first so the heart might follow. I thought about hospitality as theater, about how the table can be a stage where we rehearse tenderness without learning its lines. The meal was perfect. The script was not. I don't want you to do whatever I want, I said, easing my hand free, gentler than it felt. I want us to want the same thing, or at least to name what we want in time for the other person to choose. That didn't happen. She looked at the plates, at the neatness she'd curated, at the candles trying their best. So this is it? It's the truth, I said, and the truth has been standing outside, knocking. I'm just opening the door. We ate the rest quietly. Two careful people honoring the effort, but not the premise. When the candles guttered, the room returned to ordinary light. It felt like waking. It felt like the last warm bite before winter. January arrived with its particular quiet, the kind that makes shoes louder in hallways and breath visible in the air. The courthouse steps were salted, a thin crunch underfoot. Inside, heat hissed through vents while people carried folders like small shields. I sat beside Claire Benton at council table, palms flat so they wouldn't curl. Across the aisle, Ava smoothed her skirt with the focus of someone ironing a wrinkle that refused to learn. Judge Marisol Ramirez entered. The room stood, the old choreography that reminds you the law is not a feeling. We said our names for the record. The clerk's keys clacked, making our marriage into lines of text. Ava's attorney went first, a clean-voiced man with cufflinks that flashed when he gestured. He spoke of autonomy, of how no spouse owes their body, of how refusal cannot be punished with paperwork. This annulment petition, he said, is retaliation dressed as righteousness. He described me as a patient man until I wasn't, as a partner until I wanted more. He looked at the judge when he said it more, offering the word like contraband. Claire didn't bristle. She rose as if to explain a simple concept to a bright class. Your Honor, she began, this is not a case about access. It is a case about terms. She let the sentence stand, unadorned. Marriage is a civil contract layered over a sacred hope. The law concerns itself with the contract. Did both parties enter with a shared understanding of essential conditions, or did one party conceal intentions that would have changed the other's consent? She asked permission to play excerpts. The judge nodded. Claire pressed a button. The room filled with June, Ava's voice steady, someone stable who won't make emotional demands. July. I can be a good wife in terms of partnership and household management. I don't want to be pushed into romantic expectations that don't come naturally. August. I intend to maintain separate sleeping arrangements. If he hasn't picked up on the signals, we'll address it after the wedding. Sound is strange in courtrooms. It seems to arrive wearing a coat. When the clips ended, even the vents sounded like they were listening. Judge Ramirez leaned forward. Mrs. Donnelly Langford, she said gently. Do you dispute the authenticity of these recordings? Ava's attorney bent toward her. They conferred in whispers that didn't hide. Ava shook her head once. No, Your Honor. I was being honest. There. And with your husband? The judge asked. Silence, then. Not directly. Claire didn't press. She sat. The judge made a few notes with a fountain pen that looked like it had witnessed other endings. Then she spoke the language that changes a life in under a minute. Annulment granted. A quiet gavel. On the grounds of fraud, intentional concealment of essential expectations that go to the heart of the marital contract. The court orders the return of gifts received, in contemplation of the marriage, and awards petitioner his reasonable attorney's fees and costs. No drama, no scolding, just a record, corrected. Across from me, Ava went still, as if stillness could make a moment reversible. For a second, I saw the woman from our first coffee, careful smile, earned light in her eyes, and I wished the truth had found us sooner, before it learned the courtroom's tone. In the hallway afterward, Claire touched my elbow. Breathe, she said. Then go home. There's not. Outside, the winter sun had no heat, but it was honest about that. On the steps, I filled my lungs and watched the breath leave like a promise kept. I wasn't triumphant. Relief isn't a parade. It's a door you unlock quietly. A room with the window cracked just enough to remind you air still moves. We walked to our separate cars, each taking back our names, our mail, the way we tell our stories. The law had spoken. Now life would, in its slower, truer voice. News moved the way it always does in school communities, sideways, softly, like wind through lockers. No one asked me directly, but I could feel understanding harden into place. The teachers who'd watched Ava stand a little apart at fall festivals now had a name for that distance. Parents remembered her professional poise and wondered what it meant at home. I didn't campaign. I taught. We made dioramas of prairie towns. We measured shadows to learn angles. We practiced saying, I feel, without blaming. Children have a way of restoring the size of things. Heartbreak shrinks under a stack of spelling tests, and a question about why butterflies know where to go. I heard from a friend in the district office that Ava transferred to a quieter department by spring, then left for Illinois in June. The information arrived without flavor, like weather. I didn't celebrate. I wished her steadiness without misdirection, a life where the words on the box matched the puzzle inside. Some people learn by staying, some by leaving. At home, I rearranged the furniture I had chosen before us. The brown leather couch faced the window again, not the wall. I gave the guest room back to guests. I kept the wedding china in a top cabinet for months, then donated it to a community kitchen that hosts weekly suppers, real ones, with noise and kids underfoot and someone always asking for another ladle of stew. I imagined those plates finally earning scratches, the kind that tell a truer story than photographs. Dating came later, slower. I learned new questions. Not interrogation invitation. What does home mean to you? How do you rest? What kind of silence feels good? I said plainly what I needed, and listened for what the other person named without being prompted. Honesty changed the temperature of the room. It asked nothing grand, only presence. Once, on a porch after rain, I held someone's hand and felt how easily warmth arrives when it isn't bargained for. We didn't make promises. We made eye contact. My mother, who had loved Ava's steady eyes, said over pot roast one Sunday simple, no candles. That steadiness is only a virtue if it's paired with openness. Otherwise, it's just a closed door, she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. I nodded. We did the dishes together. The old choreography that reminds you family is built in small motions repeated until they mean something. I still think about consent the way I teach it, a living conversation, not a certificate. And I think about contracts, too, the civil overlay we place on sacred hopes. The law set my record straight. Truth set my life straighter. Security without candor turns to ice. Love without truth impersonates itself. What I want now is simpler and harder. Mutuality. Not the performance of care, but the daily choosing of it. One evening near the end of summer, I grated in the last light. Windows open. The city's hum braided with crickets. Paper rustled. Air moved. Somewhere down the block, music kept time for a life I didn't need to understand to feel glad for. I stacked the finished work, turned off the lamp, and stood in a room that finally matched its picture. The door was open. The air was honest. I stepped through,